Montana Territory, 1878. The bullet had missed Jacob Zimmerman's head by 3 inches, close enough that he could still hear the whistle of it cutting through the cold morning air 2 days later. He sat on the fence rail of his half-finished ranch, looking out over land he had killed for, bled for, and nearly died for more times than he cared to count. At 25, he had already lived harder than most men twice his age, and the lesson the frontier had burned into his bones was simple. Love was a luxury, and luxuries got you killed. A man alone could move fast, think clearly, and keep his focus where it belonged, on survival. Jacob had watched too many good men go soft over a woman, lose their edge, and end up in the ground. His own father had been one of them, so distracted by grief over Jacob's dying mother that he never saw the rustlers coming. Jacob had been 14, old enough to dig the graves, old enough to learn that attachment was a weakness this hard land exploited without mercy. But now, staring at the empty cabin he had built with his own hands, Jacob faced a different kind of problem. The Zimmerman ranch needed more than just one man to survive the coming winter. The neighboring ranchers were circling like wolves, waiting for him to fail so they could snap up his water rights. Without help, without a family to make his claim legitimate in the eyes of the territorial judge, he would lose everything. He needed sons to work the land, daughters to keep a home, and a wife to bear them. It was pure arithmetic, cold and practical as shoeing a horse. That was what Jacob told himself as he rode into Silver Creek on that frost-bright October morning. The town had grown since his last visit, a scattering of new buildings sprouting along the main street like determined wildflowers. The sign for the Silver Creek Women's Home stood crisp and white against the weathered storefronts, and Jacob felt his jaw tighten. He had heard about the widows and orphans who arrived on the wagon trains, women without men, children without fathers, all of them looking for protection in a land that gave no quarter to the weak. He was not looking for love. He was looking for a transaction. The woman who answered his knock was small, gray-haired, and had eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human foolishness. "I am Mrs. Patterson," she said. "How can I help you, young man?" "My name is Jacob Zimmerman. I have a ranch 10 miles north. I need a wife." The words came out flat, businesslike. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "I see. We are not in the business of selling women, Mr. Zimmerman. I am not looking to buy. I am looking to offer a home, protection, and a name to a woman who needs those things. I need help on my ranch." "It is a fair trade." Something shifted in the older woman's expression. "Come in," she said finally. "I may have someone who would be interested in your practical arrangement." The parlor was clean but worn, furnished with cast-offs and charity. 3 women sat in the corner doing needlework, their conversation dying as Jacob entered. He was aware of his rough appearance, the dust on his clothes, the gun on his hip. He removed his hat and nodded to them, feeling their curious eyes on him. "Wait here," Mrs. Patterson said, and disappeared down a hallway. Jacob stood awkwardly, turning his hat in his hands. Through the window, he could see Silver Creek going about its business, freight wagons and horsemen, the ordinary flow of frontier commerce. A town was protection, community, witnesses to keep the law-abiding honest and the lawless cautious. His ranch was isolation, which meant freedom but also vulnerability. Footsteps in the hall made him turn. The young woman who entered behind Mrs. Patterson stopped in the doorway, and for a moment, Jacob forgot every practical reason he had come here. She was perhaps 22, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes the color of mountain sage. She wore a faded blue calico dress that had been mended carefully at the sleeves, and she held herself with a stillness that suggested hard-won composure. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with finery or fashion, a clean natural beauty like cold water from a spring, and Jacob felt something in his chest crack, some careful wall developing a fissure. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is Miss Delia Sullivan," Mrs. Patterson said. "Delia, this gentleman has a proposition he would like to discuss with you." Delia's sage-green eyes met his, direct and measuring. "Mrs. Patterson said you need a wife." Her voice was low and steady, with the faintest trace of an Eastern accent, not frightened, not desperate, just considering the facts. "Yes, ma'am," Jacob said, and found his own voice rougher than usual. "I need help on my ranch. I can offer you a home, my name, and my protection. Any children would be provided for. It would be a legal marriage in every respect." But not a real one, Delia said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Jacob should have agreed, should have nodded and confirmed that this would be pure business, a contract with no messy emotions to complicate it. But something about the way she stood there, chin lifted, eyes clear, made him hesitate. It would be as real as we made it, he heard himself say. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. Perhaps you two should speak privately. I will be in the kitchen. When they were alone, Delia moved to the window, looking out at the street. How old are you, Mr. Zimmerman? 25, you can call me Jacob. I am 22, Jacob. I came west 6 months ago with my sister and her family. They died of cholera in Fort Benton. Her voice remained steady, but her hands gripped the windowsill. I have been working here helping Mrs. Patterson, but I cannot stay indefinitely. She needs the space for others. I am sorry about your family. She glanced back at him. Are you, or are you just being polite? The directness surprised him. Both, I suppose, loss is common out here. That does not make it hurt less. Delia turned fully to face him, and he saw the wariness in her expression, the careful guard. Why do you need a wife? Why not hire hands? I need more than labor, I need legitimacy. The other ranchers want my water rights. Without a family, my claim looks temporary. The territorial judge favors established homesteads. Jacob met her eyes. I am being honest with you. This is about survival. And what do you offer in return besides a name? A home, protection, hard work, but no harder than you would find anywhere else. I do not drink to excess, I do not raise my hand to women, and I do not cheat at cards. A ghost of something that was not quite humor touched his mouth. My mother raised me to be a gentleman, even if the frontier has knocked some of the polish off. For the first time, Delia's expression softened slightly. My mother said a man who could make her laugh was worth 10 who made her cry. I am not much for jokes, Jacob admitted. But I am not much for causing tears either. Delia was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those clear sage eyes. Jacob found himself hoping she saw something worth trusting and was immediately annoyed with himself for caring. This was a transaction. Her opinion of him should not matter beyond whether she would sign the papers. But it did matter. Standing there in that shabby parlor with dust motes drifting through the afternoon light, Jacob felt the carefully constructed walls of his solitary life beginning to shift. I need a family, Delia said finally. I need a place to belong, children to raise, a purpose beyond mending sheets and serving meals. My sister and I used to talk about having our homestead side by side, raising our children together. Her voice caught just slightly. That future is gone, but I still want a family, I still want a home. I need a wife and you need a family, Jacob said, and the words felt like standing on the edge of something vast and irrevocable. It is a fair trade. Their eyes met, held. In that moment, something passed between them, some wordless understanding that this simple arrangement might be neither simple nor purely business. Jacob saw the loneliness in Delia's face, the hunger for connection that mirrored his own carefully denied need. He saw strength, too, and pride, and a courage that had carried her through loss into an uncertain future. Delia must have seen something in him as well because she nodded slowly. All right, I will marry you, Jacob Zimmerman. They were wed 3 days later in the Silver Creek Church, with Mrs. Patterson and the minister's wife as witnesses. Delia wore a borrowed dress of cream-colored cotton and Jacob had splurged on a new shirt and string tie. The ceremony was brief, the words ancient and binding. When the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Jacob hesitated, unsure of the boundaries of their arrangement. Delia solved the problem by rising on her toes and pressing a chaste kiss to his cheek. For appearance's sake, she murmured, but her hand trembled slightly in his. They rode out to the ranch that afternoon, Delia's few possessions packed in a carpetbag behind Jacob's saddle. She rode well, comfortable on horseback, which was a relief. The ranch was 10 miles of rough country, too far to walk when winter storms closed the roads. Tell me about your land, Delia said as they followed the river north. 200 acres, most of it good grazing. The cabin is small but sound. I have 30 head of cattle and 6 horses. Jacob glanced at her. It is not much compared to the big spreads, but it is mine. I filed the claim 3 years ago and have been building it since. Alone. Mostly. I had a partner for the first year, but he moved on to the gold fields. Jacob did not mention that his partner had left because he thought Jacob was crazy to try ranching in territory where the big outfits controlled the water and the territorial government. I have been on my own since then. That must have been lonely, Delia said quietly. Jacob shrugged. Loneliness is safer than trust. He felt Delia's eyes on him but did not turn to meet her gaze. They rode in silence for a while, following the river as it wound through stands of cottonwood and pine. The October air was sharp with the promise of winter, and the aspens had turned gold on the hillsides. "It is beautiful," Delia said, and Jacob heard the wonder in her voice. "I grew up in Philadelphia. We had a narrow house with a tiny yard. I never imagined so much space." "Space can be a prison as much as a crowded city," Jacob said. "But yes, it is beautiful, especially before the blizzards hit." Delia laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuinely warm, that Jacob felt something loosen in his chest. When was the last time he had heard laughter on his land? The cabin came into view as they crested a low rise, and Jacob tried to see it through Delia's eyes. It was solidly built, logs chinked tight against the cold, with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Small as he had warned her, but he had built every inch of it himself. The barn and corrals were beyond it, and farther still, the pastures rolled away toward the mountains. "You built all this yourself?" Delia asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am, I am your wife now." She said it matter-of-factly, but Jacob caught the slight emphasis on the word wife as if she were testing how it felt. "All right, Delia." He helped her down from the horse, hands at her waist, and was abruptly aware of how small she was, how delicate her bones felt under his hands. She looked up at him, and for a moment they stood close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Then Delia stepped back, smoothing her skirts. "Show me my new home." The cabin was clean, at least. Jacob had spent the past 3 days scrubbing and organizing, trying to make it look less like a bachelor's rough camp and more like a place a woman could tolerate. One main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led to a loft where Jacob had always slept. A smaller room, barely more than a closet, branched off the main space. "I will sleep in the loft," Jacob said quickly. "The small room can be yours. I know it is not much, but there is a real bed frame and a mattress I bought in town. I will build a proper partition so you have more privacy." Delia set down her carpetbag and looked around slowly. Jacob found himself holding his breath, waiting for her reaction. Would she see only the roughness, the poverty compared to whatever life she had known back east? "You have books," Delia said, and he followed her gaze to the shelf above the fireplace where he kept his few precious volumes. "Yes. My mother taught me to read. She said a man without books was a man without a past or a future." Delia crossed to the shelf, running her fingers over the spines. "Shakespeare, Dickens." "A collection of Whitman's poems." She turned to him and her smile was genuine. "You are full of surprises, Jacob Zimmerman." "I am a rancher who reads poetry. Out here, that makes me either educated or insane." He found himself almost smiling back. "The neighbors have not decided which." "Perhaps both," Delia said. She opened the volume of Whitman, and her voice when she read was soft but clear. "I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." The words hung in the air between them, unexpectedly intimate. Jacob cleared his throat. "I should show you the rest of the property before dark, and we need to discuss how things will work here." Over the next hours, Jacob walked Delia through the ranch, explaining the routines and rhythms of the work. She listened intently, asking practical questions about the cattle, the horses, the garden plot that had gone wild in his neglect. She was not squeamish about the realities of ranch life, did not blanch when he showed her where to slaughter chickens or explain the brutal calculus of culling weak calves. "I am not afraid of hard work," Delia said as they stood looking out over the pastures in the fading light. "My sister and I ran a boarding house for 2 years after our father died. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden, and manage accounts. I can shoot a rifle, though I am not much good at it. I will earn my place here, Jacob." I did not doubt that, and he found that he meant it. There was a core of steel in Delia Sullivan, now Delia Zimmerman, that had nothing to do with her delicate appearance. They ate a simple supper of salt pork and beans, the conversation awkward as they navigated the strange intimacy of sharing a meal in what was now their home. When the dishes were cleared, Jacob banked the fire and lit a lamp. "I will give you privacy to change," he said. "Call up to the loft when you are ready." In the small bedroom, Delia unpacked her few belongings with hands that shook only slightly. The bed was narrow but looked sturdy, the mattress lumpy but clean. A small window looked out toward the mountains, already losing their definition in the twilight. This was her home now. Jacob Zimmerman was her husband. The strangeness of it threatened to overwhelm her. She had told herself this was practical, a solution to the impossible problem of being a single woman alone in the West. She had told herself that affection was not necessary, that respect and fair dealing were enough. But now, having spent a day with Jacob, Delia found her careful plans complicated by inconvenient reality. He was not what she had expected. Yes, he was young and undeniably handsome, with dark hair and eyes the color of creek stones and a lean, muscular frame that spoke of hard physical labor. But it was more than that. He was educated, thoughtful, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with bravado. And beneath his practical, businesslike exterior, Delia sensed a deep loneliness that matched her own. It would be easy to care for him, dangerous perhaps, but easy. She changed into her nightgown and wrapper, brushed out her hair, and called to Jacob that she was ready. She heard him moving in the loft above, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of blankets. The cabin settled into nighttime quiet, with only the whisper of wind and the occasional call of an owl breaking the silence. Delia lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what she had done. The first weeks of their marriage established a pattern. Jacob rose before dawn and saw to the stock while Delia prepared breakfast. They worked through the day, often side by side, speaking little but developing an easy rhythm. Delia proved herself capable and uncomplaining, whether she was helping Jacob mend fence, preserving the last of the garden vegetables, or making soap from rendered fat. In the evenings, they ate together, and sometimes Jacob would read aloud while Delia sewed. They were polite with each other, careful, like two people walking on new ice, testing each step. But underneath the careful politeness, something was growing. Jacob found himself noticing small things, the way Delia sang softly while she worked, the way she laughed at the antics of the barn cats. The way she had rearranged the cabin to make it more efficient, adding small touches of comfort and beauty without asking permission. She had put wildflowers on the table, hung curtains at the windows, and somehow made the rough space feel like a home. And at night, lying in the loft, Jacob was painfully aware of Delia sleeping just below him. He heard her moving around, preparing for bed. He imagined her brushing out her long, honey-blonde hair, and the thoughts that followed were anything but businesslike. He was starting to care for her. Worse, he was starting to want her, not just physically, but in all the ways he had sworn were too dangerous. Delia was fighting her own battles. She caught herself watching Jacob when he worked, admiring the smooth strength of his movements, the competence in his hands. She noticed how gentle he was with the horses, how patient with her questions, how he never spoke down to her or dismissed her ideas. He treated her as a partner, and that respect was more seductive than any pretty words could have been. She wanted to know him, truly know him. She wanted to understand the shadows that sometimes crossed his face, the walls he kept so carefully in place. She wanted to make him laugh, to see him genuinely happy, to break through that armor of isolation he wore like a second skin. But she was afraid of wanting too much, of caring too deeply for a man who had been clear that this was a practical arrangement, afraid that if she offered her heart, he would not want it. One evening in early November, a hard frost silvered the world outside. Jacob had spent the day riding the property line, checking for gaps in the fence where cattle might drift. He came home cold and tired and found Delia ladling stew into bowls, the cabin warm and fragrant. "There are tracks along the north boundary," he said, shrugging out of his heavy coat. "Unshod horses, probably a hunting party moving through. Nothing to worry about, but I will keep watch." Delia handed him a bowl. "Do you worry about Indian attacks?" "Not as much as I worry about white rustlers," Jacob said honestly. "The tribes have been moved to reservations, but there are still some holdouts in the mountains, and I do not blame them." This was their land long before it was mine. They ate in companionable silence for a while, then Delia said, "Tell me about your family. You mentioned your mother taught you to read." Jacob's expression closed slightly, and Delia immediately regretted the question. But after a long moment he spoke. "My mother was from Boston, educated at a girls' school. She met my father when he came east buying horses for his freight business. She shocked her family by marrying him and coming west." Jacob stared into his stew. "She was not suited for frontier life, not really. It wore her down. She died when I was 13 and my father followed a year later." "I am sorry," Delia said softly. "That must have been terrible for you. It taught me that love makes you vulnerable. My father was so destroyed by losing her that he stopped being careful, stopped watching his back. The men who killed him probably would not have succeeded if he had been paying attention." Jacob's voice was flat. "I decided then that I would never let anyone matter that much." Delia set down her spoon. "And now you have a wife." Jacob looked up, meeting her eyes. "This is different, we both know what this is." "Do we?" Delia asked quietly, "because I am not sure anymore." The words hung between them, dangerous and honest. Jacob's jaw tightened. "Delia, I am not asking for anything you cannot give," she said quickly. "I am just saying that these past weeks, living here, working beside you, it has been good, better than I expected." "You are a good man, Jacob Zimmerman." "You do not know that," he said roughly. "You do not know what I have done, what I am capable of." "Then tell me." For a moment Delia thought he would refuse, would retreat behind his walls. But something in his expression shifted, and he stood abruptly, crossing to the window to stare out at the frost-bright night. "I have killed 3 men," Jacob said. "The first was one of the rustlers who murdered my father. I tracked him for 2 months and shot him outside a saloon in Miles City. I was 15 years old." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his shoulders were rigid. "The second and third came at me together last spring, trying to run me off this land. They drew first, and I was faster." Delia rose and moved to stand beside him, though she did not touch him. "You defended yourself, that is not murder." "No, but it still means I have taken lives. It means I know what it is to kill a man, and it does not haunt me the way it should. That scares me sometimes, Delia, what I might be capable of if someone threatened what was mine." "Or who?" Delia said softly. "If someone threatened me, would you kill to protect me?" Jacob turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes." "Then I am glad you are capable of it," Delia said. "Because this land is hard and hard men are needed to survive it. But that does not mean you are only capable of hardness, Jacob. I have seen your gentleness with the animals, your patience with me, the way you read poetry and keep your mother's memory alive. You are more than just a survivor." "And what if I want to be more?" Jacob asked, his voice rough. "What if I am tired of being alone, of keeping everyone at a distance? What if I want—" He broke off, looking away. Delia's heart was pounding. "What do you want, Jacob?" "I want this to be real," he said finally, the words pulled from somewhere deep. "I want you to be my wife in truth, not just on paper. I want to build a family with you, raise children, grow old on this land together. But I am terrified, Delia, because wanting those things means giving you the power to destroy me." For a moment Delia could not speak around the tightness in her throat, then she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am terrified too," she admitted. "I lost my sister, my only family. I swore I would never let myself love that deeply again, never risk that kind of pain. But these weeks with you have shown me that I am not built for safety. I need connection, family, love. I need you, Jacob. And yes, that terrifies me." Jacob's hand tightened on hers. "We are a fine pair of cowards." "Or perhaps we are brave," Delia said. "Perhaps choosing to risk love despite our fear is the bravest thing we could do." Jacob turned fully toward her, raising his free hand to cup her cheek. His touch was gentle, reverent. "I do not deserve you." "You do not get to decide that," Delia said. "I chose you, Jacob. I choose you now, knowing the risks, knowing the dangers. I want this marriage to be real." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Jacob bent his head and Delia rose to meet him, and their lips found each other with a sweetness that stole her breath. It was a first kiss and a promise, a beginning that felt like coming home. Jacob's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Delia melted into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished and wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to do this badly," he warned. "I am going to be overprotective and stubborn and terrible at talking about feelings. And I am going to be independent and opinionated and far too curious about things that are none of my business," Delia countered. "We will figure it out together." That night, Delia climbed the ladder to the loft, and Jacob welcomed her into his bed and his life with a tenderness that made her weep. They came together slowly, learning each other, and when Jacob finally made her fully his wife, Delia understood that she had found what she had been seeking all along. Not just safety or security, but belonging, home. The next weeks passed in a golden haze of new love. Jacob still rose before dawn and Delia still worked tirelessly through the days, but now there were stolen kisses in the barn, laughter over shared meals, and nights spent in each other's arms. The walls Jacob had so carefully maintained crumbled, and in their place grew something strong and true. But the frontier was not kind to happiness, and trouble came riding in on a cold December morning. Jacob was in the barn, feeding the horses, when he heard the sound of multiple riders approaching. His hand went instinctively to his gun as he stepped outside. 3 men on horseback were coming up the track from the main road, and Jacob's blood went cold as he recognized the lead rider. Thaddeus Kingman, owner of the Triple K Ranch, the biggest spread in the territory, and a man who wanted Jacob's water rights badly enough to do almost anything to get them. "Zimmerman," Kingman called as he reined in. He was a big man in his 50s, with graying hair and eyes like chips of flint. The 2 men with him were obvious hired guns, hard-faced and watchful. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you, Kingman." Jacob stood with his hand near his gun, acutely aware that Delia was in the cabin behind him. "Now that is unfriendly," Kingman said, though his smile did not reach his eyes. "I am here to make you an offer, a fair offer for your land." "Not interested. You have not heard my price yet." "Do not care. This land is not for sale." Kingman's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake, son. A man alone out here is vulnerable. Accidents happen, cattle stray, fences get cut." "I am not alone," Jacob said flatly. "I have a wife now. A legal claim that the territorial judge will uphold." Something flickered in Kingman's eyes, surprise and calculation. "A wife, well, that does change things, congratulations." The word sounded like a threat. At that moment, the cabin door opened and Delia stepped out. Jacob wanted to shout at her to go back inside, but she was already moving toward them, her chin lifted in that way he had come to recognize as pure stubborn courage. "Good morning," Delia said. "I am Mrs. Zimmerman. Can I offer you gentlemen some coffee?" Kingman's gaze raked over her and Jacob felt rage rise in his throat. "That is very kind, ma'am," Kingman said smoothly. "But we were just leaving. I was telling your husband that this is hard country for a small operation. I would hate to see a young lady like yourself struggling through a bad winter." "We will manage," Delia said coolly. "My husband is very capable." "I am sure he is," Kingman said, "but capability only goes so far when you are outnumbered and outgunned. Good day, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Zimmerman," he wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. As soon as they were out of earshot, Jacob turned to Delia. "You should have stayed inside." "So he could threaten you without witness?" Delia shook her head. "I am not a decoration to be kept safe while you handle everything, Jacob. We are partners, that means we face trouble together." Jacob wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it would be pointless. "Kingman is dangerous. He has the money and the men to make my life hell, and now he knows about you. That puts you at risk." "I was at risk the moment I married you," Delia pointed out. "This land, this life, it is all dangerous, but I knew that when I said yes." She took his hand. "We will figure this out together." Over the following days, Jacob's unease grew. He started riding armed even when checking on the cattle nearby, and he taught Delia how to properly shoot his rifle. She was a quick study, her aim improving rapidly with practice. "You are thinking about Kingman constantly," Delia said one evening as they cleaned the supper dishes. "Tell me what you are planning." Jacob hesitated, then decided she had a right to know. "I need to make our claim unassailable. That means improving the property, adding more permanent structures, a bigger house maybe, or another barn. Proof that we are building a real homestead, not just squatting on good grazing land. That will take money we do not have, Delia said practically. I know, I have been thinking about selling some of the cattle early before the spring drive. It would bring less money, but it would give us working capital. Or, Delia said slowly, we could breed the cattle and sell the calves next year for more money. That is a longer gamble. If Kingman makes his move before then. Then we fight, Delia said simply, but I think we should play the long game, Jacob, build slowly and well, show everyone that the Zimmerman ranch is here to stay. Jacob looked at his wife, at the determination in her sage-green eyes, and felt his heart swell with love and pride. When did you become such an expert on ranching? I have been reading your books, Delia said with a small smile, and listening when you talk, and thinking about what it takes to build something that lasts. They decided on a compromise. Jacob would sell a few head to raise some immediate cash but keep most of the herd for breeding. They would spend the winter making improvements where they could, proving their commitment to the land. But winter in Montana territory was brutal, and it brought challenges neither of them had anticipated. The first major blizzard hit in mid-January, a howling white fury that lasted 3 days. Jacob and Delia huddled in the cabin, feeding the fire and praying the cattle would survive in the shelter of the coulees. When the storm finally broke, they found 2 calves frozen and one of the horses lame with frostbite. This is my fault, Jacob said, staring at the dead calves. I should have brought them closer to the barn. You cannot control the weather, Delia said firmly. We lost 2, but the others survived. We learn and we move forward. But the losses stung, and they were only the beginning. A week later, Jacob discovered that someone had cut a section of his fence, and 20 head of cattle had drifted onto Kingman's land. When Jacob rode over to retrieve them, Kingman's foreman claimed they had no cattle bearing Jacob's brand. You are calling me a liar, Jacob demanded. I am saying we have not seen your cows, the foreman replied, his hand resting on his gun. Maybe they drifted further north, or maybe they never existed. Jacob knew that pushing the issue would lead to gunplay, and he was one man against an army of Kingman's hired guns. He rode home empty-handed and furious, feeling impotent and outmaneuvered. Delia took one look at his face and poured him coffee laced with whiskey. Tell me. He did, the words bitter in his mouth. I should have shot the fence cutters when I had the chance. Now Kingman has 20 of my cattle, and there is nothing I can do about it without starting a war I cannot win. Then we find another way, Delia said. We report it to the sheriff. The sheriff is in Kingman's pocket, Jacob said flatly. Everyone knows it. What about the territorial marshal? Jacob paused. The marshal would listen, but he would need proof. And by the time he investigated, Kingman could have sold the cattle or altered the brands. They sat in silence, the firelight casting shadows on the walls. Finally, Delia said, then we make sure everyone knows what Kingman is doing. We talk to the other small ranchers, the townspeople. We build alliances. Most people are too afraid of Kingman to cross him. Maybe they are just waiting for someone to stand up to him first. Over the next weeks, they did exactly that. Jacob and Delia rode to the neighboring small ranches, talking to the families who were struggling under Kingman's shadow. They found sympathy and shared grievances, but also fear. Kingman had driven men off their land before, using legal manipulation when he could and violence when he could not. But slowly, carefully, a network began to form. The small ranchers agreed to watch each other's land, to report incidents to the territorial marshal as a group rather than as individuals. It was not much, but it was something. In town, Delia made friends with the merchants and their wives, subtly spreading word of Kingman's tactics. She was careful, never openly accusing, but making sure people knew that the Zimmerman ranch was being targeted. Public opinion might not stop Kingman, but it would make his actions harder to justify. Through it all, Jacob watched his wife with growing awe. Delia was fearless in ways he had never imagined, wielding social connections and public sentiment like weapons. She was fighting their battle on a different front, and she was winning. You are magnificent, he told her one night as they lay together in the loft. Delia turned in his arms, her honey blonde hair spilling across the pillow. We are magnificent together, she corrected. You give me courage, Jacob. Before I met you I was just surviving, now I am living, fighting for something that matters. I love you, Jacob said, the words still new enough to feel strange and wonderful on his tongue. I know I do not say it enough, but I love you, Delia Zimmerman. I love you too, she whispered and kissed him, but the peace was fragile and it shattered in early March. Jacob had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Delia alone at the ranch. He hated doing it, hated leaving her vulnerable, but they had been over this argument a dozen times. Delia refused to be a prisoner in her own home, and she was armed and capable. Still, he hurried through his errands, anxiety gnawing at him. He was loading flour and coffee onto his pack horse when he heard the gunshot. It came from the direction of his ranch, a single sharp crack that sent ice through his veins. Jacob abandoned the supplies and spurred his horse into a gallop, pushing the animal hard over the frozen ground. His mind was screaming Delia's name, conjuring horrible possibilities. The ranch looked quiet as he thundered up to the cabin, but Jacob saw the broken window immediately. He was off his horse and through the door in seconds, his gun drawn. Delia stood in the center of the room, Jacob's rifle in her hands, her face pale but composed. On the floor near the door lay a man Jacob did not recognize, groaning and clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. He tried to force his way in, Delia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I warned him, he did not listen. Jacob holstered his gun and crossed to his wife, gently taking the rifle from her shaking hands. Are you hurt? No, just frightened. Now that Jacob was there, some of the steel went out of Delia's spine and she sagged against him. I did what you taught me. I warned him, gave him a chance to leave, and then I shot to wound, not kill. You did perfectly, Jacob said, holding her close. He looked down at the wounded man. Who sent you? Go to hell, the man gasped. Jacob knelt beside him, his expression cold. You broke into my home and threatened my wife. I could kill you right now and no jury would convict me. Or you can tell me who sent you, and I will let the law handle it. The man hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Pain and fear won. Kingman, he wanted to scare your woman, make you think about leaving. Big mistake, Jacob said. He used strips of cloth to bind the man's wound, not gently, then tied his hands. Delia, get the sheriff. Tell him we have a man here who confessed to breaking and entering. The sheriff will not do anything, Delia said. He will if half the town sees you bring him to the jail, Jacob replied. Make sure people notice, make sure people talk. Delia understood immediately. She changed into her best dress, pinned her hair, and rode to town looking every inch the respectable rancher's wife who had just defended her home. By the time she returned with the reluctant sheriff, a dozen townspeople had heard the story, and more were gathering. The sheriff had no choice but to take Kingman's man into custody. That night, Jacob held Delia close, unable to shake the image of what might have happened if she had not been armed, had not been brave, had not been his fierce, strong wife. I am all right, Delia whispered. We are all right. This time, Jacob said, but Kingman will not stop, he is escalating. Then so will we. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. Jacob was mending the fence along the north boundary when he saw riders approaching. Not 3 this time, but 8, all of them armed. Kingman rode at their head and his expression was thunderous. Jacob stood his ground, though his heart was racing. He was 1 man against 8, and they were far enough from the cabin that Delia would not hear if shooting started, but running would be worse than dying. If he showed weakness now, Kingman would never stop. You have caused me considerable trouble, Zimmerman, Kingman said as he reined in. My man is facing charges, people in town are talking. You have made me look weak. I have made you look like the bully you are, Jacob replied, and people are tired of it. You are not the law here, Kingman. You do not get to run people off their land. This is my territory, Kingman said, his voice rising. I was here first, I built the biggest spread, and I will not let some nobody with 200 acres and a pretty wife stand in my way. Then you will have to kill me, Jacob said flatly, because I am not leaving. And if you touch my wife again, I will hunt you down no matter how many men you have. Big words from a man who is outnumbered. He is not outnumbered. The voice came from behind Kingman, and Jacob's heart leaped as he saw riders approaching from the south. 4 men, all of them neighboring small ranchers, all armed, and from the west came more townspeople on horseback, led by the newspaper editor. "We heard you might be having trouble," one of the ranchers called to Jacob. "Thought you could use some witnesses." Kingman's face went red with fury. "This is none of your concern." "You are wrong," the newspaper editor said. He was a thin man with spectacles, but his voice was firm. "Intimidation and violence against lawful landowners is everyone's concern, and I will be printing a full account of this incident in tomorrow's paper." Jacob saw the calculation in Kingman's eyes, saw him weighing his options. He could start a fight here, but it would be witnessed by a dozen men, reported in the press, and investigated by the territorial marshal. Or he could retreat for now and find another way. Kingman chose retreat. "This is not over," he said to Jacob. "You have made a powerful enemy." "No," Jacob replied. "You made enemies of everyone you tried to push around. I just gave them a reason to stand together." As Kingman and his men rode off, the ranchers and townspeople gathered around Jacob, clapping him on the back, offering support. The newspaper editor shook his hand. "Your wife came to see me," he said, "told me the whole story, gave me names and dates. She is a force of nature, that one." "She is," Jacob agreed, pride swelling in his chest. That evening, the ranch was full of visitors. The neighboring families came bearing food and goodwill, turning what could have been a violent confrontation into a celebration of community. Delia moved among them, gracious and warm, and Jacob saw how she had woven these connections, building alliances that would protect them far better than guns ever could. When the last guest had left and they were finally alone, Jacob pulled Delia into his arms. "You did this," he said. "You built this network, made these friendships. You saved us." "We saved us," Delia corrected. "You stood up to Kingman. You showed everyone that he could be challenged. I just made sure they were watching when you did it." Jacob kissed her, pouring all his love and gratitude into the embrace. "I was so wrong," he murmured against her hair. "I thought love made you weak. But loving you has made me stronger, braver, better." "We make each other better," Delia said. "That is what love is supposed to do." Spring came to Montana territory with a rush of green and the bawling of new calves. The Zimmerman ranch had survived the winter, and more than survived, had grown stronger. The cattle had bred well, and the alliances Jacob and Delia had forged held firm. Kingman had not made another move, deterred by public scrutiny and the knowledge that the small ranchers were now unified. In April, Delia announced she was pregnant. Jacob's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down and fussed over whether he had been too rough. Delia laughed at him at his sudden overprotectiveness, but she was crying too, overwhelmed by happiness. "We are going to have a family," Jacob said, his hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. "A real family, Delia, children growing up on this land, learning to love it the way we do." "Sons and daughters," Delia agreed. "Growing up free and strong. Like their mother," Jacob said, and kissed her. They threw themselves into preparations, Jacob building a cradle from pine wood, Delia sewing tiny clothes. The neighbors threw Delia a party, bringing gifts and advice. Mrs. Patterson came all the way from Silver Creek to visit, beaming at the transformation in the uncertain young woman she had introduced to Jacob Zimmerman. "You have found happiness," Mrs. Patterson said, taking Delia's hands. "Real lasting happiness, I am so glad." "So am I," Delia said. "I came west looking for security and I found love instead. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." The baby came in December, a daughter with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's creekstone eyes. They named her Rose, and she was perfect. Jacob held his daughter with shaking hands, overcome by the enormity of his love for this tiny being and for the woman who had given her to him. "I was so afraid," he confessed to Delia as she recovered, Rose sleeping in the cradle beside their bed. "Afraid that loving you would destroy me, but now I understand. Love does not make you weak, it gives you something worth fighting for. It makes you whole." "We are whole together," Delia said, reaching for his hand. "A family." Life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. Rose grew, thriving in the clean mountain air and the love of her parents. Jacob expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. The cattle herd increased, and with it, the ranch's prosperity. Other children followed: Rose, a son named Matthew 2 years later, then another daughter, Clara. The Zimmerman Ranch became known throughout the territory as a model of what could be achieved through hard work and partnership. Jacob and Delia were respected, their advice sought by other ranchers and homesteaders. The network of small ranchers they had helped organize became a powerful force, checking the ambitions of men like Kingman and ensuring fair treatment under territorial law. Years passed and the rough frontier began to soften. Towns grew, schools opened, and the rule of law became more established. But through all the changes, the Zimmerman Ranch remained a constant, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear. On their 10th anniversary, Jacob and Delia stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. Rose was teaching Matthew to rope a fence post, while little Clara toddled after them, laughing. The mountains rose purple in the distance, and the evening air was sweet with the scent of hay and wildflowers. "Do you remember when I told you I needed a wife and you needed a family?" Jacob asked, his arm around Delia's waist. "I remember," Delia said, leaning into him. "I remember thinking it was the most unromantic proposal imaginable." Jacob laughed. "It was purely practical." "And completely wrong," Delia said, turning to look up at him. "You did not need a wife, you needed love. And I did not need just any family. I needed you and the family we would build together. I needed this life, this love, this home." "I love you," Jacob said, the words as easy now as breathing. "I will love you until the day I die," Delia Zimmerman. "And I love you," Delia replied, "my stubborn, courageous, wonderful husband." They kissed as the sun set over their land, over the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. The frontier had tested them, tried to break them, but they had emerged stronger. Together, they had turned a simple transaction into a great love story, proving that even in the hardest, most unforgiving land, love could not only survive but flourish. The Zimmerman Ranch would endure for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, but its true legacy was not measured in acres or cattle. It was measured in the love that had founded it, the courage that had defended it, and the family that had made it home. Jacob and Delia had come together as strangers seeking practical solutions to frontier problems. They had found something far more valuable, a partnership that transformed them both, a love that made them brave, and a family that gave meaning to every hardship they endured. In the vast, lonely expanse of the Montana Territory, they had built a home not just with logs and nails, but with trust, respect, and love that deepened with every passing year. As darkness fell and they called their children inside, Jacob and Delia knew with certainty that they had made the right choice that day in Silver Creek. What had begun as necessity had become the greatest blessing of their lives. They had needed each other, yes, but more than that, they had chosen each other every day through every trial. And that choice, renewed again and again, had built something that would last forever. Their story was one of courage and transformation, of two wounded souls who dared to risk their hearts on the unforgiving frontier. And in the end, they proved that love was not a luxury or a weakness, but the very foundation upon which a life worth living could be built. The cowboy had needed a wife, the young woman had needed a family, but what they created together was so much more than either could have imagined. They created a legacy of love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of choosing courage over fear, connection over isolation, and love over loneliness. The wild frontier had tried to make them hard and alone. Instead, they had become strong and united, proving that even in the harshest land, the human heart could find its home.